and you're good on time?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I will count us down and we will go in 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Jeff Frick here, coming to you from the home studio for another episode of Turn the Lens. And I'm pretty excited about this. Before I was quite the heavy broadcaster, I spent a whole lot of time in youth sports with my 3 kids who are very active in a lot of different activities, sports, dance, the whole gamut. And, the parents play a big role in that. And there's a lot of volunteer organizations. And one of the big national organizations has been trying to really change the culture of youth sports and really bring back more of the positive, is the Positive Coaching Alliance. I was fortunate to take their training. I looked it up. It was back in like 2000, I think a couple years after it was started. But we've got the current president joining us from Chicago today. So let's welcome in Jason Sachs. Like I said, he's the president of Positive Coaching Alliance and has been there for 18 years, which is amazing. Jason, great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. So we had a chance to get together. You had an event out here in the Bay Area, which was pretty cool. Had a couple of the local professional soccer players there, Emily Menges and Jamie Shepard. And you talked about kind of some of the latest things going on at Positive Coaching Alliance. Why don't you give people who aren't familiar with the organization kind of the 101 and what you guys are up to?
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. So Positive Coaching Alliance, we're a national nonprofit organization. We were founded out of Stanford in the Bay Area. The overall mission is to change the culture of youth sports so that every child, regardless of social or economic circumstance, has access to a positive youth sports experience. We really want to make sure that kids and youth sports in our country are positive, they're accessible, they're equitable for regardless of what community you're living. I think most people don't understand. They know how big youth sports is, but they don't really recognize that 35 million kids are playing youth sports each year. It's a $30 billion industry, right? If you drive around on the weekends or the weeknights throughout different communities, that's where people are, right? They're at the sports fields, they're practicing their games. But we want to make sure that it's still seen as a youth development platform and not just something that's all about competition, wins and losses, trying to get that college scholarship. Because we know that with all those kids that are playing youth sports, if we don't focus on all the other life skills that can come out of it, and we're only focusing on the wins and losses, then it's a really big lost opportunity because outside of schools, youth sports is the largest place where kids gather. So it's an unbelievable opportunity to equip them with things that are going to stay with them long after their playing days are over.
So much. That's a great summary. We're going to break down a lot of those different areas and dig in. So let's start with the positive. And you talked about it. I didn't know it's the largest thing that kids do outside of school. 35 million kids. That's US, I assume.
Yeah.
Yep. So, it's about character building, right? And it's about experience. And you've got a great video on your website, I think, with Steve Young talking about, and I'm just going to read some of them because he hits them really well. Teamwork, overcoming challenges, working towards a bigger goal, resilience, risk-taking, experiencing success, failure, self-confidence, mental toughness, self-control, respect for others, being part of something that's bigger than just you. I mean, those are a lot of extremely valuable character traits. And the one that really jumps out to me the most is resilience in this challenging world. And we see a lot of people struggle with resilience. And from a parenting, I call it the parenting paradox. Like you're trying to teach your kid to ride a bicycle. When do you let go? When do you let go of the seat? And do you let them fall over and scratch their knee? And sometimes falling over and scratching their knee is the only way to learn to ride. And sports gives us multiple opportunities over many, many activities and days and weeks and years to get little versions and taste to start to do this. So I wonder if you can, share, this is a really important piece that I think, does it get forgotten? Does it not get forgotten? Does it need more highlight? Talk about the character building attributes of youth sports.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we like to say that sports can be a really safe place to fail, right? It can be, and oftentimes people will talk about, you'll hear the quote, sports develops character, right? That's what makes it so great. I agree with that, but there's a couple words that are missing. Sports done right develop character. Sports left to its own device is actually and can actually be a breeding ground for a lot of negativity, a lot of, types of abuse, physical, mental, psychological. So we need to be deliberate that if we want to get everything out of the youth and high school sports experience that you just talked about, all those life skills, they're not going to happen on their own. So we need all the stakeholders that are involved in the youth sports experience, and that's organizational leaders, that's coaches, that's parents, that's the athletes themselves. Everybody needs to be aligned that this is really that youth sports and high school sports can be this development zone, like opportunity to teach these life skills. So what we really try to do in our work is when we partner with schools and youth sports organizations at the grassroots level and national governing bodies, professional sports leagues, we are trying to equip them with tangible tools and resources so that if you're a dad, you're a mom, you're a volunteer coach, and you are out there, how are you making sure that you are taking advantage of this opportunity to teach those life skills? And you're not just, teaching the sport, focusing on the winning, but you're actually, how does a child bounce back from a mistake, right? One of our most popular tools coming out of our workshop is the mistake ritual, right? Like, how do we teach those kids that if something goes wrong, they're often they make a mistake. They look three places. They look down at the ground because they're, down on themselves. They look to their coach to see what the reaction is going to be. And then they look in the stands at their parents, right? Can everybody be aligned with, hey, that's okay, move on to the next play, right? And how do we move on? Like, you'll hear pro athletes, pro coaches talk about what's the most important play in a game? It's the next play, right? So how do we react? How do we be able to bounce back? How do we flush that mistake out of our system and move on? Those are little tangible things that we try to, teach and give those tools to coaches and parents so that they can start utilizing them in their everyday life. And I think what a lot of people recognize is that, hey, outside of sports, this actually works in a lot of different aspects of life as well.
Right. When did it go wrong? I mean, it's kind of this double-edged sword, like everything in life, with kind of the over-organization and maybe just too many damn adults, parents and not, that get involved. And, you kind of compare like your classic Sandlot baseball game with the kids grab a mitt, making up rules. There's no umps to decide what's right or wrong, versus suddenly you've got these beautiful Little League fields. Little League World Series is coming up. It's on ESPN. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The pressure of being on a national audience and making it look like the major leagues, when in fact these are not major league kids. These are kids, and there's some great books about, the whole Little League World Series experience out there that you can read. But I guess the good news is, though, now you're trying to use that organizational structure to actually come back and provide those benefits back through those organizational structures to get back to some of the core benefits and get away from, making it look like it's a World Series game.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's been this commercialization of youth sports. I think, youth sports is very unorganized in the U.S. You brought up Little League. Little League is actually probably one of the most organized organizations when it comes to, sort of like how they're structured, where their leagues are, how, everything that they do is actually really, really organized, and there's a good infrastructure there. But there's a lot of sports that they don't have that. And there's nothing at the federal level in this country either. Like, we don't have a Ministry of Sport that is dictating all this. So it becomes very fragmented. There's a lot of different people that have control in different areas. And I think what happened is people started seeing, it's opportunity, like the lure of a college scholarship, right? Or, the money that is being dumped into sports, or this opportunity for exposure and success. And, if it's not good enough, if we're not feel like we're getting the best competition here, we can go elsewhere. We're going to start our own league. I mean, a lot of it came down to money, right? Like, that's how it started moving and moving faster. I think at PCA, we don't believe that we're going to go back to the way things were,
right.
Just that. But what we're trying to do is also make sure that, barriers are broken down for people that don't have access to youth sports, right? Even in those super competitive, different types of competition and organizations that are competing in youth sports, how do we make sure that PCA and some of our values and our, tools and resources are integrated into what is happening. So, we work with Little League International, and we were just working with them on, hey, what are some resources around mental health and mental wellness so that we can provide those tools to the kids that are competing in these games, or provide tips to the parents on what your role as a parent should be, as your child's going through youth sports. And obviously training coaches is a big part of what we do as well. So I think it's, the horse is out of the barn. We're not going back to the way it was. So how do we try to make sure what is happening now, like there are a lot more resources being put towards youth sports, how do we make sure that they're being used in the right way?
Right. So many places we can go. So let's talk about the specific resources that you do provide. And I thought it was interesting at the event that we were at the other day, one of the board members, I think, talked about, their introduction to youth sports when they're oldest. It's usually when you're oldest, it's kindergarten that you do your first AYSO volunteer stint and try to learn what offsides is and put the yellow shirt on. But, you talked about coaching positively isn't necessarily innate. It's not necessarily something that you just know how to do. So let's, share with the audience, what are some of the resources that you guys have? How do you approach things like training, both for coaches and parents? And what are some of the resources that you guys have developed over the 20 some odd years here?
Yeah. So we really focus on how do we create an environment where the well-being of the student, the child that's playing sports, is at the center. And in order for, the research shows that in order for a child to feel like safe in that environment, they need to, feel like they're welcome, that they have a connection, that they're being valued, that they're being seen and they're being heard. So we want to give coaches the tools to create that environment, right? And so a lot of what we talk about in our workshops, is how do you do that? How do you create that environment? And that can be everything from how do you talk about winning? How do you talk about competition? How do you define success? We want to go from people thinking about winning where it is, the results on the scoreboard, comparing yourself to others, mistakes are a bad thing. We want to shift to a more mastery environment where you're focusing on effort, you're focusing on learning, and you're focusing on how do you bounce back from mistakes and that resilience and, learning from adversity, those types of things. And then we're going to equip the coaches with how they can actually do that in a practice or a game. The other things we talk about in our workshop could be around, what we call filling the emotional tank. And that is really communication between a coach and a child, a coach and a parent and a child, because we know that we all have emotional tanks, right? You and me, right, Raul, depending on what's happened in our day-to-day or how we're feeling, we could have a full tank, we could have, an empty tank. And just like a gas tank in a car, like if your tank is empty, you're not going to go very far, right? So in order to make sure that we are, filling up kids when they are at our practices, at our games, right? We need to talk about how we're giving them feedback, how we're coaching them, what are tools, like what are nonverbals, what are the impact that they have on our kids. So I think it's those types of tools that we're trying to give to our coaches so that they feel equipped and empowered to have those types of conversations with kids that, and develop the relationships with the parents and families so that it is a good environment where kids want to come back. We also talk about things like honoring the game, which is really closely around sportsmanship, respecting the rules, opponents, officials, teammates, and yourself. I mean, that's something you can teach to kindergartners, and you can teach that to professional athletes as well, right? Those are things that go across, all levels of the game. And we do this by partnering with, grassroots organizations, national organizations. We have these workshops that are both live, in person, interactive. We have them via Zoom, where it's still very interactive, but it can be virtual. And then we have self-paced courses as well, where people can do that asynchronously and get certified through PCA. But we don't just focus on the coaches, because coaches is one piece of this ecosystem within youth and high school sports. We also have training for organizational leaders, parents, student athletes, where we really focus on character and leadership development, because we know that if you don't have everybody aligned, it's really hard to change the culture. So we need to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table and they can figure out what their role is and how they impact the overall experience.
And then how do they engage with you? They engage as a league? Do they engage?
Yep.
And is it a paid thing? Is it a free
Yeah.
thing? Is it X number of training classes for the organization and so many coaches? Kind of what is an actual engagement for a league that wants to do a better job here look like?
Yeah, all of the above, right? So we partner with over 1,000 school districts, youth sports organizations. That's where a lot of our work is happening through that partnership with a league or a school. Then they'll bring us in and say, hey, we're going to have all of our coaches at our back to school, coaches meeting on Tuesday night in the cafeteria. We want your trainer there to provide the training for those 2 hours. We have some, national governing bodies where we're actually building courses with them, or they're using our online courses to train, their coaches as part of their mandated certification program. So we have a great partnership with the U.S. Soccer Federation, which is the governing body for soccer. Obviously, our U.S. women's national team just won a gold medal in Paris, which was awesome. But the Federation, they are also focused on youth soccer and growing the game. And they have a safe soccer clearance program where PCA and U.S. Soccer Federation built a course together around positive soccer environments. And we have, hundreds of thousands of youth soccer coaches are going to be going through that online course over the next few years. So it's a variety of ways that people can access not only our workshops. It can happen through our grassroots partnerships. It can happen through some of our national partnerships. Someone could go to our website right now and take one of our online courses for a small fee. And so we are a nonprofit organization. So in some communities, people are paying to receive our partnerships. That covers a portion of what it costs us to put those on. We're raising funds to go into communities that can't afford it. We're raising funds to offset the cost of all of our programming. So it's a combination, but then we obviously rely on philanthropic support from individuals, corporate partners, foundations, things like that.
And you mentioned a couple numbers, but let's just get a bunch of numbers out. So why don't you just take a minute and talk about the scale that you guys have achieved, and whether it's annually or over whatever period of time, or kind of what your objectives are, both in terms of kids, organizations, and adults.
Yeah. So this year we'll probably train around 80,000 coaches nationwide.
80,000 coaches nationwide.
80,000 coaches wide. Yeah, nationwide.
And most of those are coaching kids probably between whatever
5 and 18. Yeah. So
great.
Yeah, exactly. We partner with about 1,000 or so schools and youth sports organization, park and rec organization, boys and girls clubs across the country. We will do around 3,000 live workshops this year. We are in the midst of our busiest time. We're recording this in August. So you think about schools coming back, fall sports starting, last week alone in one day, we had 30 workshops. One day, 30 live workshops around the country. So the scale is there. We're getting bigger. What we want to be able to do is, regardless of what type of organization you are, you could be a big travel soccer club, or you could be a boys and girls club, in Oakland, and we can work with you, right? We can work with you by training your coaches and working with your parents. We can help you recruit coaches and place them within your organization, or we can look at the whole community and say, why are the children here? Why is their youth sports experience not the same as, maybe a more affluent community? What are the things that we can help provide that experience and bring more resources so that all kids have access to this type of youth sports experience? So we're about a $14 million, nonprofit organization a year, and we're continuing to grow. And we have, over the next 5 years, our goal is to reach over 7 million young people participating in sports. And that's going to mean that we're going to have to train, 500,000 coaches. We're going to have to go to communities and create more opportunities for kids to participate in sports, because in some communities, they don't have access. There isn't a team for them to play on. So how do we work with local leaders to make sure that they're creating those opportunities as well?
Wow, huge impact. And then what are some of the softer things that you measure for success?
Yeah, so we look at, there's a lot of, impact is important, obviously, for all nonprofit organizations. And there's two ways we can look at it. We can look at it through outputs with a lot of the things I just talk about, like number of partners. We can talk about, how many coaches we're training, how many workshops we're doing. But from a outcome based, mindset, there's a lot of things that we're looking to measure. One is that, the data and the evaluation that we have that, as a result of PCA programs and initiatives, youth exhibit teamwork, confidence, resilience, persistence, all the things you talked about earlier. If you have an organization that's going through PCA consistently, these are the types of things we're going to see in our youth. We're going to see coaches have that ability to really focus on positive youth development in their role. They're not just going to be focused on the wins and losses. They're actually going to be able to focus on some of those life skills that we talked about. But it's going to be at the forefront for them, and they're going to feel equipped to be able to do that. Youth sports organizations say that their cultures are more positive. They have less, conflicts between coaches and parents, parents and officials, coaches and officials. So it's actually making the sport more fun, right? That's what it should be, right? And communities also feel this, they see this increased quality sports programs happening in their community, and parents feel more connected to their child's school and their community when PCA is in the mix, because it's creating that better culture.
Yeah, you got the joy over your shoulder. So,
that's right. I mean, that's a good reminder. And it's interesting. A lot of PCA's content comes from, support psychology research, social, educational psychology, but we also take from best practices from professional and college coaches. One of the members of our national advisory board is Steve Kerr, the Warriors coach. His coaching philosophy, he talks about joy, mindfulness, compassion, and competition. And and he talks about it like if they're struggling, at a stretch, he's saying like we just don't have the joy in the game. Right. Like even at that highest level, you see coaches are focusing on how do we make sure that those types of skills, we're keeping them at the forefront, because that's what's actually going to lead to better performance.
Right. You certainly see it in Curry's face when they're in their flow.
That's no right. doubt about it. Exactly.
All right. So I hate to wipe the big smile off your face, but we got to talk about some of these dark things that because you've got your finger close to the pulse, I just want to get your take. And the first thing, and I brought it up at our event the other day, was multi-sport athletes. And I want to expand it not only to multi-sport, but kind of multi-activity. And unfortunately, there's a pressure for kids to specialize early and to give up other things, whether that's other activities like plays or whatever, and to do the one thing. And we know that's not a great thing. And both Emily and Jamie, professional soccer players, both said that they played other sports in high school. I think Jamie played basketball. I can't remember what. I think Emily was lacrosse. I don't know if you have any data to back it up or evidence, but what do you tell people in terms of really thinking more holistically about a sports experience versus just isolating on one particular skill or sport and just over focusing? Because the other thing that often happens, you might have a great athlete, but you burn them out by the time they're 16 because they've been doing nothing but the single sport for 3-4 seasons a year. What's the best practices around that?
Yeah, I think if you were to talk to any smart coach at the, like high school, college, professional level, like all those coaches would say, we want players that are playing multiple sports and they're not specializing at an early age. They might say like, okay, when they get to high school, maybe that's when you start to hone in on one sport. Becomes a little more difficult if like the competition level and the time and the energy that you're putting into one sport, that might happen. But at the youngest level, it needs to be multiple sports. And there's a lot of different reasons. You talked about the burnout factor, right? From a mental standpoint, there's going to be burnout. I think from a physical standpoint, there's risk of overuse injuries that are happening. Like you look at baseball and all the Tommy John, if you look at the concussion issues in football, right? Because so many hits at the younger age, where it's like, there's different ways that you can navigate this now. There's a lot more options. There's things that you can do, but how do we educate parents? Because it's very easy. My wife and I, we have, soon to be 9-year-old twins, boy-girl twins that are active in youth sports. And I can feel it, right? I've worked at PCA for 18 years. This is like my world. I can feel the pressure if they're not playing multiple sports, or, hey, have they tried out for a travel team yet? Or are they getting extra help? And I'm like, no, because they're 8, right? That time is going to come. If they want to do that, great. I'm going to go out in the backyard. I'm going to spend more time. If they're showing, hey, I really want to play more soccer, like this is what I want to do. Okay, let's talk about that, right? But I am not going to try to chase and keep up with everybody else. And I think that's really difficult. And I don't fault parents for, it's easy to get caught up, and you want to provide all the opportunities possible for your child. So, but what I would say is, and only 1% of 1% people are going professional. But if you look at, who's getting drafted in all these different sports, and you look at what they've done, they've played multiple sports. Not only does it help with, developing different muscles and, the psychological break and just getting new sports. One of my favorite stories from Chris Collins, the Northwestern men's basketball coach who played at Duke, coached under Coach K, has, been a part of USA basketball gold medal winning teams. He said his dad was, Coach Michael Jordan at the Bulls. So he was a great basketball player. And he said, my parents made me take a break from basketball. And he said, I played baseball. He was like, I was always the best basketball player on the team. He said, baseball, I was mediocre. And he said, you know what that taught me? It taught me what it felt like to be an okay player on a team. So that, and how did I want to be treated by the better players? So that when I went back to basketball, I knew he was like, I was the best player, but I knew what it meant to be the number 5 or number 6 player on the team. And how can I be a better teammate to those players? Because I've been in that position in basketball. So just the ability to interact with different groups of people, there's so much that people can get out of playing multiple sports. So I'm a proponent of playing multiple sports. I think the issue now is I think people are not specializing, but now they're playing 2 and 3 sports in one season, which I think that's where we start to run into just over scheduling and, too many sports at once. And there's some studies that have come out recently that talked about not stacking multiple sports in one day or, those types of things where that's happening a lot.
Yeah. Like, I'm guilty as charged. I did all the bad things you could possibly do. So you talked about the 1% of the 1%. So let's talk about another, kind of issue is this chasing of the scholarship or this chasing of the potential professional career. Ironically, at our high school, just a couple years older than my oldest kid, we had 2 kids that made the pros. Jock Peterson, played for the Dodgers and the Giants. I'm not sure where he is now playing baseball. And Devontae Adams, played on our field, who's with the Raiders now. So, you can actually see real kids that it happens. That said, the percentages are so low, and that if you put that as your primary objective, again, you just miss out on all these benefits in this pursuit of something, which, again, if the kid's going to make it, the coaches will find you. Right. The scouts will find you, but it's just, again, kind of it's just too much parents, too much organization, too much focusing on the wrong goal, when for the vast majority, it's really about the experience of what they're going through in the moment.
Yeah. And I think one thing, another really good resource that we have, we call it the 100-point exercise, and we give it to parents. And it's basically, forcing a parent, it asks the parent, it says, what are your goals as a parent for your child in sports, right? And it could be youth or high school sports. And we ask them to fill that out at the beginning of the season. And they need to divvy up 100 points through these different things. It could be earn a college scholarship, have fun, meet new friends, physical fitness, winning a championship. And they need to divvy up like where they put their 100 points. And then we ask them 2 things. We say, all right, look at where you put your points, where you put your emphasis. And a lot of them will be like, oh, I'm all about like the sportsmanship. I'm all about I don't care about winning. And then we say, mimic those points when you're in the stands and what you're cheering for. Are you only cheering for the results plays? But you said you didn't care about those, right? So it's like trying to hold them accountable to what's important to them. But then we also ask them to take a blank version of that and give it to their child and ask their child, what are your goals in this, right? And see, we've gotten so much feedback of, wow, this opened up a conversation with my child that we've never had before. And I didn't know that they really wanted to play at the next level. And again, if the child is driving that, great, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about it. But if we, the parent, are pushing them in a direction that they don't want to go, then we're only doing harm. So this tool helps them get on the same page with what they both want to get out of the youth sports experience. And hopefully, we can't put 100 points in getting a college scholarship and going professional, because it's against the odds that that's going to happen. And because we've talked about all these great things that can happen in playing sports, let's make sure that we're starting to focus on some of those and we're a little bit more deliberate.
Yeah. I would love, do you guys have a published roll up from like a league or something? It's obviously anonymized, but I can just imagine joy, meeting new friends.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah on the kid's side versus what's on the parent side. I bet the disparity, especially across 100 variables, must be giant. Yeah.
I mean, and even if you look at, right, and I think we've all been guilty of this, right? I've coached, basketball at the high school, college level. And we joke, like, we are not anti-competition, right? We are not everybody gets a trophy. We want kids to be able to access this positive youth sports experience. We want them to thrive in those environments. We want to create these healthy environments. But what's really fun too? It's winning, right? And I think what makes sports this magical place is the competition factor, if it's done the right way. And so I think all of this comes down to is that, parents often, are coaching little league or coaching youth soccer, and the team loses a game. The parent might be stressing over that for, 2 or 3 days that they lost, right?
Right.
How long the child's stressing over it? Like 5 minutes.
Right.
And on to the next thing, right? So it's like, we need to, as parents, need to recalibrate our expectations, like what we're looking to get out of this and why we're putting in the time as a coach and how we can develop these players. And so I think it's matching up those expectations of all the different roles within the youth sports experience.
Yeah. Well, I love that one advice you gave earlier, just knowing that as soon as somebody makes a mistake, they're going to be looking at you. And what is the face that you're going to reflect back to them, right?
What are you doing as a parent, right? And, if your child makes a mistake and you go like this and they look at you, you think that's going to help them or hurt them, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
It's got to be, hey, that's okay. We're on to the next play, right? Those types of things.
Right. So another topic, which is a tough one, and it's kind of an extension of the one we just talked about, is kind of club versus, whatever your local. And I want to distinguish between like AYSO and, some of the little organizations that are just the organizations versus the highly competitive travel teams. Maybe that's a better way to talk about them. And invariably you get this conflict because of level of competition, timing of seasons, or whatever. And often I've seen, you take kids in the high school situation specifically out of the opportunity to play for their high school, to wear the colors of their high school, to, participate at a high school level, regardless of the competition. The kids are in high school for 4 years. And it just seems like, again, just a misprioritization of, what's important. What are they going to remember? What are the long-term benefits? Always giving aside, there might be, this small percentage where, they just want to be a pro and they're 100% committed, but more often than not, it's coming from the parents. And the side junk to that is, you talked about it, the additional coaching. Yeah. And again, guilty as charged, hiring private coaches to work on skills. You got one-on-ones with kids and a coach with a 10-year-old working on their ball dribbling skills. It's like, really? Or should they just be out, hanging out, being a kid? So what do you think about travel, some of these kind of high competition travel teams and that conflict with high school?
It's really difficult. I mean, high school sports is such a great institution, such a great experience. So I hate when I see when kids can't play high school sports because of a club commitment or whatever. So I think those are some of the extreme, but it happens more in some sports, and it's just a shame. Like, it's just it's a part of it's the overall experience. I think in the moment you're like, well, where's the better competition? What's going to make me better? And again, we go back to like, well, what was the overall reason and goal for participating in this, right? It's more about those experiences, those relationships, those things you're going to look back on, and you're not going to be able to go back and do that, and you're going to miss out on it. So I think those are tough. When you think about the lower level of kids, when you start to get into that, and that's the thing that's starting earlier and earlier, right?
Right.
6, 7, 8 years old, like you could be playing for a club and you're playing, more times a week. And I think that, again, it becomes this, like, keeping up with the Joneses. Like, how do we make sure that my child doesn't get left behind? And if they're not playing travel at a certain age, is that going to impact their high school career?
Right.
And it's like, probably not. Like, there's a lot of early bloomers and late bloomers, and, like, we don't know. A lot of kids drop out of sports by 13 because either opportunities are lost and there's not enough rec programs for kids to continue on that aren't playing at a competitive level. Kids are getting burned out. They start to specialize on a certain sport. So I think, again, it comes back to, I don't have a problem with, if your child's going to play for a club team and the child really wants to spend more time, that's totally fine. I think it's really important for clubs to be really clear with the expectations of and what families and children and coaches are going to get out of being a part of that club. Because I think oftentimes people might sign up, they spend a ton of money, it becomes year round, and then maybe their child isn't playing as much as they thought they should be. And then that's where some conflict happens, or, people feel like it, like, hold on, I was sold a bag of goods that wasn't true. Like, how do we get past that? So I think being upfront, being really clear with what you're looking to get out of it, what is this organization providing? And I think it's totally fine. Kids are going to develop at different ages. Like, there are some 8-year-olds that, yeah, they probably could be doing more, right? And there's some 8-year-olds that probably it's not going to click for them for a couple of years, and that's okay. And they might be level by the time they get to 13, right? So we don't know, but I think it's just keeping a realistic outlook as a parent and not getting caught up, and really thinking about what is best for your child and how can we make sure that the child wants to do that, right? Like, if you see that your child is going outside every day on their own and kicking that soccer ball and working on their footwork and dribbling and all that, that's awesome, right? And then maybe it's like, hey, I want more help. Like, can I go and work more? Like, that's great. That's the ideal situation, versus I'm the parent saying, I think you need to do this. Now we're dragging you to this extra help or multiple practices a week or whatever it might be. So
yeah. And unfortunately there's a nasty underbelly of people that take advantage of parents' dreams and are selling can of goods. And it's like, the kids just want to play. They don't want to be on the most competitive team and ride pine and fly all over the country to ride pine. You hear just horror stories.
Totally. And it becomes, and I think one of the things that's really unfortunate is it's become a status thing, right? Almost like my self-worth as a parent is driven by how good my child is at youth sports. And I don't know, like, when we got there, but it's unfortunately because you start to see that a lot, where it's like, oh, your child isn't playing travel soccer yet, or, oh, they're just playing rec, or, whatever it might be. And again, everybody has different needs, has different wants. It's like, if they want to be in a play, if they want to play an instrument, if they want to do stuff, like, there's so many options for kids right now. It's totally fine if they don't play. And, we have friends where it's like, oh, you know what, she's not going to play soccer this year and she's 9. And it's like, great. Guess what? She can always come back in 2 years and play. Like, kids aren't retiring when they take a season off, right? They can always come back. And I think parents need to keep that in mind, that just because my child wants to take a break doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to come back, because they may.
Right. So, but they're all stuck on this perception of this linear progression of expertise to get to that college scholarship, which is kind of silly. All right. So now I'll ask you another topic, which is a little controversial, but also I think we can have a little fun with it. And that's trophies. And participation trophies. And just a couple of backgrounds, on one hand, there's a school of thought that says, they're not good. They're not really rewarding winning behavior. And then there's a whole nother school of thought. Well, for a lot of kids, it might be the only trophy that they ever get. And then there's an element too of potentially, being part of the team, that, it's more of a team trophy than an individual trophy. And then just to kind of close on the concept, because I think it's less about the trophy than what it actually physically is. Back in the day, they used to give the winner of the Boston Marathon a laurel wreath, right, on his head or her head. That's all you got. And there's a whole kind of psychology around, if the extrinsic value of the reward is high, this is where
Yeah.
Super Bowl ring, it actually diminishes the intrinsic motivation in terms of accomplishing the goal, getting through the journey, accomplishing the challenge. So trophies are a kind of tricky part. And full disclosure, I had no trophies as a kid, and my cousins had 1,000. I thought it was the coolest thing since sliced bread. So, it's not an easy topic. Give us kind of your guys' thoughts on trophies and awards.
I think there's a time and place for all of them, right? I think at like the youngest ages when kids are first playing, like that's awesome. Like they love it. They get so excited, right? They say, "Oh, look how many trophies I have," because at that point, the point of them playing is to learn the sport and participate and get out on the field. And that is why they're getting rewarded for that. So I think it all comes down to, again, I keep on saying this word, like the expectation and why are we giving them a trophy? Like if the trophy is not for the championship team, it's like, right, because they're 6 years old and there is no champion. They're all doing great things out there and we want them to come back. Like that should be the goal of all youth sports coaches. How are kids coming back? If a trophy helps that, great. I mean, I don't think we need to be doing that for their entire life, but to your whole thing around, the value of what it is, my daughter is playing flag football right now, and the coach, after every game and every practice, they have this big chain with a dog on it, the mascot.
Right.
And it's like the dog of the day. Who showed the best effort, who was listening, who was a good teammate, and who worked the hardest, right? And at the end of the day, like the kids are competing for that. That is, and it's like a $10 necklace, right? That they wear to the next practice and then somebody else gets it. Like those types of things to drive some of the behavior that you're looking for. And it becomes this fun thing that everybody's vying for. Those are things that I think work and that are, really special for the kids that are participating. I think just getting as kids get older, I think, wants and needs change it. And so I don't know. So I think again, why are we giving out the trophy? What's the need for it? And I think at some aspects and some organizations at certain ages, I think it's a great idea. And then at others, I think there's other things you can do to drive some of the behavior that you're looking to see.
I love that framing because you are trying to drive participation and you are rewarding participation, not winning when they're 8 years old. I think that's a really great framing. So we're getting towards the end of the time. Kind of a last kind of contrast I want to get your take on is kind of professional coaches versus parent coaches.
Yeah.
And they both have pros and cons. And the reality is for most organizations, the vast majority of people in the organizations are parent volunteers because that's when you're engaged and you're participating and, all the money has to go for fields and uniforms and refs, et cetera. So I wonder if you could share some thoughts around the good news and bad news of professional coaches and kind of the good news and bad news of parent coaches and how, maybe organizations think about that.
I mean, I think the most important thing is that you have a couple things. One, you're equipping coaches with the tools that they need to be a good coach. Two, that you are giving the coach a job description of what is expected of them. I don't think we do enough of that in youth sports. It is,
great tip.
Hey, we need you to coach. Like you're a warm body. Here are the balls. Here are the uniforms. Go ahead. And it's like, okay, like I've never played the sport. I watch it on TV. Great. I'm just going to do what I see on TV. Like we don't want that. So how are we equipping and training coaches, whether they're paid or not paid, right? Just because somebody's a paid coach doesn't mean they're a good coach, right? So I think regardless of who is coaching at your organization, it is training them, it's evaluating them, and it's showing them the expectations and holding them accountable to those expectations. And I think those are the things that, we need to focus on. And I totally get it. Youth sports, to run a youth sports league, it's expensive. There's a lot of different things you need to do, but we kick off a lot of our workshops talking about like who was the most impactful coach or mentor that you've had in your life. And people remember that immediately. And they say, it was my coach from 30 years ago. It was my coach from 40 years ago. And then we say, why? And they start talking about it. It's like, because the lessons that they taught us, like the support that they gave us, it's never because we won this many games, because we had the best uniforms. So it's really the experience that people remember. And oftentimes we want to make sure that that becomes what we also invest in as an organization, as a school. So how are we where are the ways that we can invest in our coaches, our experience, to make sure that that's what kids are remembering down the road, and it's not just about the wins and the losses.
That's great. That's a great close. I think we'll leave it at that. So how can people get involved? How can people find out more? Give us a little bit of the detail, how people can contribute and get involved.
Yeah, we'd love to have you check us out at positivecoach.org. You can check out our resources. We have a whole resource zone on our website. You can learn about some of the different workshops and trainings. If you're a parent, there's plenty of content and resources for you. If you're involved with a school or youth sports organization, you can check out ways that we can partner. And obviously, as a nonprofit organization, we always love people that donate to support what we're doing across the country. So positivecoach.org.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason, for the time today. Really appreciate getting to know you a little bit better, and I can't be more supportive of the cause. I think it's such an important part of our culture, youth sports, and with a little training and some tools and guidance, anyone can be much, much better at the task. You just need training like anything else. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
All right. He's Jason. I'm Jeff. You're watching Turn the Lens with Jeff Frick. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening on the podcast. We'll see you next time. Take care. Awesome. That was great.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was great. Appreciate the opportunity. It was fun.
Oh, for sure. My pleasure.